Hello, guys. Once again, I want to welcome you to our YouTube class. And in today's class, we are going to be looking at evolution. Evolution is an important concept in the study of biology, and you must understand that the capacity to evolve into new forms is a fundamental characteristic of every living organism. Every living creature has that innate capacity to evolve into a new species or into a new form. And when we talk about evolution, we are talking about the sum total of the adaptive changes that have occurred over a long period of time. And these adaptive changes resulted to the formation of new species. And apart from resulting to the formation of new species, there are other species that also went into extinction within this period or because of this never ending process. And when we say never ending process, the process of evolution is continuous. It's not something that that ends. It's something that is continuous. It does not stop. It's a continuous process. So in this continuous process, so many organisms evolved from their ancestors, and some also went into extinction. And it is important we note carefully that there are two different types of evolution. We have the organic evolution and we have the artificial evolution. When we say organic evolution, we mean that this type or kind of evolution occurs naturally without human intervention. Something that occurs, the kind of evolution that occurs naturally without human intervention. And of course, you should know that evolution is not something that happens within 2 years or 10 years or even 100 years. It takes sometimes millions of years for evolution to occur or for an organism to transform into a new species or for speciation to occur. The formation of species, the formation of new species, that is what we call speciation. So speciation is not something that happens. Speciation is not something that happens within a short period of time. It takes a long period of time before speciation can occur. The second type of evolution is the artificial evolution. And in this type of evolution, there is a kind of a human intervention to make the process work. We'll have plant breeders or animal breeders that use several biological processes to induce evolution or to cause evolution to occur. We'll have selective breeding, where you select individuals with desirable traits, and of course you allow them to propagate their life cycle within that environment. So you select the organisms that have desirable traits that are advantageous for their survival in such environment. So through selective breeding, evolution can also occur. We also have genetic engineering, where genes are combined from different organisms. This can also cause evolution. And like I said, this type of evolution is artificial evolution because it has human intervention. Then we also have induced mutation. Plants, plant parts such as the seed can be exposed to maybe radiation or chemical mutagens. We have physical mutagens such as radiation. We also have chemical mutagens. When this part of the plant is soaked in a chemical mutagen, it could induce mutation, it could cause mutation. And this mutation, once it accumulates over time, can result to the formation of a new species. So these are some of the different biological technologies or processes that a man can use to induce evolution or to cause evolution. And once this kind of evolution occurs, that is what we call artificial evolution. So there are two kinds of evolution, like I said: organic evolution. Organic means it's natural. Anything that is organic is natural, does not require human intervention. And the second one is artificial evolution. Nowadays, it is kind of accepted without question that evolution occurs, or that evolution has been occurring. And one of the persons who pioneered this process of evolution is a man we call Charles Darwin. Just a minute. All right. So, like I said, it has been widely accepted that evolution is something that is common to living creatures. Uh, then I also said that one of the pioneers, as a matter of fact, the man who is known as the father of evolution is Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin, you know, uh, quickly made attempts through observation and careful study of organisms. He was able to put up his historic book he called The Origin of Species. He was able to put up this historic book he called The Origin of Species. And in this book, The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin was able to make some deductions or some observations. We can call it the four observations of Charles Darwin with respect to evolution, and he penned it down in his book known as The Origin of Species. One of the observations that Charles Darwin made was the fact that most organisms produce large number of offsprings, more than the environment can support, or more than the environment can more than more than yes, more than the environment can support, or more organisms that may not be able to thrive or to survive in its environment. And this is nature's way of making sure that there are enough individuals that will propagate the the life of the parent organism. Because if, for instance, a fish may lay 1,000 eggs, and out of this 1,000 eggs, it may be about 5, 10, or 20 that will mature into adults. Humans too give birth to many children. Sometimes they don't mature to adults. Out of 6 children, 2 may die or 1 may die. By the time they get to adults, sometimes they may become 3 or 4. So it is an innate a phenomenon, or let me say, I don't want to put it now. Uh, Nature naturally makes sure that every living organism should have enough offspring that can help to propagate its life. And that is why there are so many offsprings. Nature makes it such a way that a typical female, a typical female organism will have that capacity to produce so many eggs, so that the chances of survival will be high. Because not all these organisms eventually mature into adults. So if the chances of if nature does not make it in such a way that organisms have more than enough, then of course we may not have enough offsprings to ensure that the life of the parent organism continues. So this is one observation that Charles Darwin made. He said that most organisms produce more offsprings more than the environment can survive. And in such a situation, what now happens is that some of them will die, and the little that remain will continue to propagate the gene of the parent organism. So that's the first observation. Then the second observation is that the population of organisms are fairly constant, but then sometimes there could be variation. Sorry, there could be fluctuation. The population of organisms are fairly constant, and yes, the population of an organism may should remain constant according to Hadewinba's equilibrium principle. It remains constant except if there is a migration, people leave the population, or people come into the population, immigration, or if there is a if there is a kind of death rate, if there's a kind of death in such population. So these are some of the factors that can now bring about fluctuation in such environment. If the death rate, of course, supersedes the birth rate, there could be fluctuation. If the immigration supersedes the emigration, or the immigration supersedes immigration, so these are factors that could lead to fluctuation. Apart from these factors, you will discover that the entire population remain remains fairly the same or constant. I mean, the population remains fairly constant in terms of size if these factors do not play a role. Then the third observation that Charles Darwin also made was the fact that there could be variation among the populations of among the organisms of the same population. Among the organisms of the same population, there could be variation. That is the third observation. And finally, a minute. Then finally, well, when Charles Darwin also said that some of these variation may be favorable to the existence of the organism in such a population. There are some variations that either uh, become advantageous or become disadvantageous to the survival of the organism in the population. So he is now saying that some of the variation could be favorable to the survival of the organism in such a population. From these four observations, Charles Darwin now made what he now called two different deductions, so two different conclusions. And one of the conclusions is that organisms are in struggle for survival. They are in struggle for survival. That is number one. So organisms are constantly struggling for survival. And according to him, the second one now, remember I'm talking about the deductions that he made, organisms are in constant struggle for survival. And the ones that now survive, that's the second deduction now, or conclusion, are those ones whose variation confer a kind of advantage for their survival in that environment. So if some organisms developed some traits or have some variations that or genes that are favorable for their survival in such environment, then these are the ones that will survive. And that was why Charles Darwin now also made the last statement by saying that natural selection is one of the sources of evolution, and this is natural selection working through environmental pressure. When you talk about environmental pressure, you're talking about the factors within the environment of an organism that influence its survival. This environmental pressure is actually the raw material through which natural selection works. And that natural by natural selection, I mean that nature on its own will now favor those organisms that have favorable traits, that have favorable genes that will enable them to survive in that environment. Those that do not have will be washed away or probably will go into extinction. They will die because they don't have the necessary gene that will enable them to survive when the environmental pressure arose. So it is the environmental pressure that mounts the pressure. And once it mounts the pressure, just like when a storm comes, those that are fit are now the people that will survive the storm. So those that are fit will now be selected by nature. So the environmental pressure is a raw material that makes evolution to sorry that makes natural selection to occur, and by extension evolution. So Charles Darwin was able to discover that natural selection is one of the forces that brings about evolution. But then he did not know that that is what will now this will now lead us to neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism. So when we talk about neo-Darwinism, we are talking about the modern view of evolution. The modern view of evolution is neo-Darwinism. So we discover that let me write this, neo-Darwinism. So in this neo-Darwinism, other scientists went into experiment. This is similar to what was studied in genetics. Mendel made some like postulations, the first law of Mendel, the second law of Mendel. And Mendel did a very beautiful job in his study of genes. As a matter of fact, we can't talk about gene without referencing that man, that Augustinal monk that is known as Mendel. But we now have a modern view of Mendelism, where other scientists now began to discover some of the things that Mendel was not able to discover. Something like multiple allelism, something like incomplete dominance, something like lethality, something like pleiotropism. So this is similar. Charles Darwin was only able to identify natural selection as a factor that bears evolution or that brings about evolution. Of course, natural selection working through environmental pressure. He did not know that apart from natural selection, that there are other natural factors or other natural phenomena that can also bring about evolution. And that is where neo-Darwinism comes. So this is modern view of evolution. The view of Charles Darwin is an archaic view, even though it's correct, but it's an archaic view. Now, scientists that worked on this same subject also came up with the idea that apart from natural selection, there are other factors that can bring about evolution in a population. And one of them, and of course, this they were able to get they were able to get to this conclusion as a result of the study of genes and the chromosome. One of the uh, one of the forces that can also bring about evolution is mutation. They identified mutation. They identified mutation as one of the causes of variation in the population, which of course will still lead to evolution. Or to be direct, you can still say causes of evolution, the natural causes of evolution. They identified mutation. Remember, I said Charles Darwin was able to discover only natural selection, and he thought that it was only natural selection that could bring about evolution. So we now know that mutation, and when we say mutation, we mean alteration in genes. When we have alteration in gene, and these changes in the sequence of gene accumulates over a period of time, it could result to speciation or the formation of speciation. However, depending on the nature of mutation, there are some mutations that are so deleterious, so dangerous, that can even result to harm to the organism. And there are some mutations that are neutral. Neutral. That means it does not have much effect. It does not have effect on the organism, even though mutation has occurred, but that kind of mutation is neutral. But when the uh, mutation becomes substantial and accumulates over a long period of time, it has the ability to result to speciation. It has the ability to result to the formation of new forms, new kind of organisms different from the parent organism. And when you know that a new species has been formed, is when those new species are not able to mate with the parent organism or the original population from when they evolved. That is when you know, because mating can only occur between individuals of the same species. So a time comes when that mutation accumulates over a long period of time, that we now see lots of changes between the newly formed organisms and the parent organism. And in such a time when they are not able to mate again, that is when you now say that a speciation has occurred. So mutation is one of the causes of evolution. Then another one is gene flow. Gene flow. Gene flow. So have one mutation, then two gene flow. Gene flow. So when organisms of the same species and organisms of the same species and of a population mate, or it could also be organisms of the same species but of different population. Of course, when we say population, we mean the collection of organisms of the same species living within a geographical location. We can also have organisms of the same species, but they are not living in the same geographical location. They are living in another geographical location, but they are still of the same population. Why? Because they are the same species. So when organisms of the same species mate together, their gene recombine and spread across the population. When it happens, that is what we call gene flow. Their genes have now flowed within a population because of the mating that has occurred. And of course, they mate and continue to mate and continue to mate. So that is what we call gene flow. So if there is gene flow, it's a kind of brings about genetic variation. And this genetic variation over time could accumulate to result to the formation of a new species. So gene flow, according to this darwinism, is another factor that can bring about evolution. Just a minute. So, like I said, gene flow can bring about genetic recombination, and this variation over time can bring about uh, can bring about can bring about evolution. Then the next one or the last one is what we call genetic drift. Genetic drift. Genetic drift. And when we talk about genetic drift, we're talking about uh, random changes, random changes in the gene which occurs by chance alone, mm, or changes in gene frequency which is a product of chance. So there are two different effects or two different phenomena that are used to explain a genetic drift. The first one is what they call the bottleneck effect, and the second one is what they call the founder effect. So when you talk about the bottleneck effect, it's a kind of genetic drift that occurs when a population happens to be accosted by a kind of disaster. Maybe there is a kind of uh, let me say fire outbreak that kills maybe 90 that kills maybe 90 to 99 of a population, 90 to 99% of a population. That remaining 1% no longer contains the entirety of the genes that are contained within the parent organism. So this 1% has lower gene pool compared to the gene pool that once existed in the parent organism. So mutation can also accumulate in this little gene pool found in this 1%. And over time, you discover that they now have uh, uh, features or characteristics different from the parent organism. And that can result to speciation over a long period of time. Similar to this is what we call founder effect. In founder effect, a certain group of an organism, let's also assume that we have 100 organisms here in a population. Five of the organism may travel to another location to begin an independent life. You discover that once they get there, as a result of environmental pressure, most of them will be able to develop features that will enable them to survive in such environments. And those that have those features, of course, will be selected by nature. And mutation can also occur or accumulate in their gene in such a way that they now begin to form features or characteristics that are now different from that of the parent organism. This again can result to evolution. So these are the four different causes of evolution. All right. Then the next thing I want to look at now is we want to look at the pattern of evolution. The pattern of evolution. And number one is that one species gradually transforms into another. That is the first pattern of evolution. One species, after it has accumulated a mutation, just like we explained, can now transform into a new species. Then we also have a situation whereby uh, one or two species evolve as a direct evolve as offshoots of a single ancestral species. So what we're now saying is that we can now have a situation whereby organisms, that's what we call divergent evolution. A situation whereby uh, organisms of different species evolved from a single ancestor. So if we have this as a single ancestor, so this is a single ancestor, then this is species 1, this is species 2, this is species 3, this is species 4. So this is called divergent evolution. In this kind of evolution, we'll have organisms of different species, evolving from a common ancestor. They actually came from a common ancestor, but as evolution occurred, they now formed different species, or speciation occurred. That is what we call divergent evolution. That's the second pattern of evolution. The other pattern of evolution is what we call the convergent evolution. And in this case, we now have organisms that similar looking organisms, or organisms with similar characteristics, coming from different ancestors. And that is possible. It's possible for organisms to have uh, similar features or characteristics. Sorry. It's possible for organisms to have similar characteristics or features, but then they are coming from different ancestors. This kind of evolution, this kind of evolution is called convergent evolution. And the reason why they have similar characteristics could be as a result of the environment where they found themselves. Because in that environment, probably they require some traits or characteristics to be able to survive. And they both, or they all evolved to possess such characteristics. That they have similar characteristics does not imply that they are coming from the same ancestor. Some of this can be traced using the phylogenetic tree, especially for scientists that are looking at the linkage, evolutionary linkage between among organisms. Then the last pattern of evolution is what we call coevolution. Coevolution, coevolution. And when we say coevolution, in this case, organisms evolve together, mm, having some features that will enable them to survive together. And when we say organisms evolve together, that does not mean that they actually evolve at the same time. But the most important thing under coevolution is the fact that they evolve with characteristics that will enable them to survive in such environments. So interacting species evolve with adaptive changes in one producing complementary changes. This is known as evolution. It's shown in flowering plants. So, like I said, in the case of coevolution, two organisms evolve with a kind of characteristics that will enable them to survive, like pollinators and flowering plants. Then we now have a plasmodium mosquito. All these organisms co-evolve together to be able to kind of interact together. Of course, there are basic interactions that exist between organisms. So those features that will enable these organisms to interact together, they actually evolve with it. So that is what we call coevolution. So that's the last pattern of evolution. Then lastly, before we go, we'll quickly talk about the evidence of evolution. The evidence of evolution. And the first evidence that's to show that evolution occurs or has occurred is what we call the fossil record. Life on Earth is recorded in fossil. And when we say fossil, we're talking about the remains of dead plants and animals that formed sediments, mm, over a long period of time. Mm. And you see them in the sedimentary rock. So the remain of these plants and animals over a long that have died, the remains of dead plants and animals over a long period of time is what we call the fossil. And like I said, through this fossil and using what we call the radioisotope, scientists are able to trace the evolutionary trend of organisms, by arranging the fossil from the older to the youngest. They'll be able to trace the organisms that evolved first, because traces of these organisms are recorded in the fossil. So fossil uh, record is one evidence that evolution occurred. The second one is the biochemical similarities. All organisms are made up of this complex macromolecule, carbohydrates, protein, lipid, and they actually have the same mechanism of generating energy using uh, the mitochondrion, and of course where the ATP is generated, the energy currency of the cell. So most organisms follow the same pattern in the generation of energy. So that is what you see under biochemical similarities. So these are biochemical similarities you see among organisms. Then of course we also have molecular record. Mm. If you look at the molecule, which is uh, the location where the hereditary information is stored, which is the DNA, you see that all organisms have the same kind of nucleic acid or DNA, where the genetic information is stored and processed. So that is another evidence to show that evolution occurred. Then we have what we call comparative anatomy. If you look at the basic anatomy of vertebrates, you see a kind of basic plan of the skull, then the vertebral column, and the girdle through which the limbs are attached is similar. Mm. Then, of course, you can also discover that, in terms of vertebrates, the a kind of a progressive complexity from simple to complex. Like in the case of fishes, you see that fishes have two-chambered heart, then they metamorphose to, sorry to use that word metamorphose, so that it won't get confused, so that you won't get confused. So from having a two-chambered heart in fishes to having a four-chambered heart in a mammal. So you can see a kind of similarities in that anatomy. Then, of course, from having single form of circulation to having double form of circulation. Then embryology, the study of embryos. If you look at the embryos of the vertebrates, you see a kind of similarities, like the gill slate and tail are structures that are common to all the vertebrates, from that of the species to amphibians to reptiles to eels and mammals. Then, of course, as they began to specialize, then that is when you may now see differences. But at that basic level of embryo, at the first stage, you're going to see lots of similarities between the embryo of all the vertebrates. So this is another evidence to show that evolution once occurred. All right, this is where we'll stop. See you in my next class.